Okay. Well, thanks for joining today, October 26th. Let me bring my camera on so you can see who I am. So for anyone that's new to this particular meetup, I'm Tony Dubiel. I work for Red Hat. I'm out of Raleigh, North Carolina, and I'm a product solutions architect. So that basically means that I focus on Ansible, and I help customers who are either looking into using the Ansible automation platform, or existing customers who are like introducing new use cases into the platform and may be in need of like demos or proof of concepts and those types of things. My background is networking, so I spent a lot of time as a traditional network engineer, and went through all the certification path through mainly through Cisco, so CCIE and all that good stuff. And I got into automation when I was working at Cisco, and I really liked Red Hat's Ansible, or even before that, it was just Ansible, right? So Red Hat acquired Ansible, and I wanted to spend more time, have more time to really drill down into Ansible. So I came over to Red Hat, and that's where I am today. And the team that I work with, I'm like the lead for all the network automation stuff. So I do spend more time with that type of use cases. So this meetup is generally around network use cases, but we do, at times we'll drill into just Ansible related topics in general, and that's kind of what today is. So for some of today, we're going to talk about how do we create collections, how can we use the private automation hub as a repository to store or publish those collections in our own environment, and how can we consume them either in Ansible-navigator or ultimately into the Ansible automation controller, and what that would look like as an execution environment. And if we're building that from scratch, what are some of the steps? So we'll get into all of that. So let me bring up um, my slide, but I'm just going to make sure we're okay here, I think. Yeah, so I'm going to bring up a slide and just go through a little bit of a level set before we get into any of the actual demonstration of building these constructs. So if you just hold on a second, I'm going to do full screen so I can kind of move around and back to here if I need to. And here we go. So entire screen. Oh, it's this mouse isn't working very good. Sorry about that. Let me use the touchpad. I'll be here in just a second. Sorry for the infinity screen that'll show up here in a second. I'll go over into a slide deck. So hopefully you can see the slide of the agenda. And if you have any questions, feel free. Let me pop back into the meeting. Feel free to unmute yourself if you want to talk, or you can raise your hand. It's just that when I'm in the slides, though, I don't notice that as much. So I guess like for the slide portion, just feel free to unmute yourself, and if you have a microphone, ask your questions that way. And if you leave some questions in the chat room, if I don't notice them while we're going through the material, I'll definitely take a look at this before we close out the session, and I'll ensure that I answer anything that's remaining in here as well. So from the content today, and like I was talking about, we're going to build a new collection, and the collection that we're building is a role, or roles rather, for router compliance. So even though this topic is sort of generic into the constructs of developing content, we're applying it against a router compliance use case, since again, most of the topics are around network automation, but the actual network automation today isn't as important. But we will look at some playbooks and use Ansible-navigator to take advantage of the collection that we're using to build the router compliance. If you have any questions just in general and what's going on there too, feel free to stop me if any of these terms are new to you. Someone's trying to join the room, so I'm going to pop back over here real quick, I think. Yeah, and admit. There we go. Hey, John, how are you? And I'm going to pop back into the slide real quick. Okay. All right. So the role will be based on a router compliance use case. And then what we want to do is, and I'll talk a little bit more about roles, but effectively, a role is really a purpose built playbook that we can make shareable and reusable. We can repurpose it. And that way, if we're using it in a particular project that we've created, and we front end, typically would front end that with a playbook, and then we would either import or include a particular role in our playbook. Um, Normally, like a lot of roles that we'll create them in that project. So we'll have like a roles folder. We can use the Ansible-Galaxy init to create all the folders that typically we would use as part of a role, and then we would populate that role with task and variables and other content that you would typically expect to see in a role. And then that role is typically variabilized, and we can use it in our project. But moving it or sharing it with others, that's where using the private automation hub is very valuable, because it's a very easy way for us to publish our own custom collections, and that collection could include roles. So I'll talk a little bit about collections and roles, and typically how we're consuming them just in general, because normally when we think of collections, we think of the modules. And there's two types of collections. There's the community collections that are available on Galaxy, and there's also the certified collections that are available on the Automation Hub. And then ultimately we can pull them down into our private Automation Hub. So the private automation hub is installed in our own environment. So that would be either, or it could be, a lot of different ways that we can deploy it, but it could be a bare metal or a virtual machine, or on top of OpenShift or in the cloud, but it would be its own instance that would be separate from the automation controller. And the automation controller, for those that are new to that term, it's really just the next generation of what Tower was. But now that we have a automation platform, we have additional components, and the private automation hub would be one of those additional components that would provide us with a repository for collections, but also for execution environments. So execution environments are the current way that we can provide a base image through a container that includes all of the necessary collections that we're using for a particular project, as well as any of the other dependencies. So if there's Python dependencies or any other anything that needs to be installed, or to a specific version, or if we want to pin a version of a collection, we can do all of that within an execution environment. And a lot of times execution environments, hold on a second, sorry about that, just grab this person real quick. Hey Nathan, how are you? Jump back over here. I think I advanced. Yeah, so a lot of times with the execution environments, we have, we'll package it together such that we have all of the collections and anything else that we need for the particular automation that's a part of our project. So the project could be a local project. It's your playbook directory, if you will, and we access it differently depending on the tool that we're using, right? So if we're just talking about Ansible core engine installed locally, then normally we're using a virtual environment, or that would be the recommended approach, or possibly you've installed it globally, on your laptop or on a server or a VM. And the execution environments require you to locally install all these things, including the collections, right? So when we talk about execution environments, that's a container. So we would pre-package that container with collections and other dependencies. And if you're using the Ansible Automation Controller, then we do have some available for you out of the box. So today I'm going to use one of the execution environments that is a part of the install. Like, so when you install the controller, it's available for you on that controller to use. And then I can add to it because it's a container, I can add, additional layers, and those layers would include collections or any other type of file that I need as part of that execution environment. So this will effectively take you through the steps of building your own custom execution environment. In this case, it's more personal, right? Because we're actually going to include our own collection with a role that we've created, and that has been wrapped into a collection, and then we're going to make that collection available in an execution environment, so that way anybody else who has the execution environment would have access to our role in that collection, from either Ansible Navigator or from the Ansible automation controller. So this would be an example of creating some content and then making it available in our own private environment for our other teammates. So that's a huge advantage of Private Automation Hub, because it's easy to do this, and you'll see as we go through the steps. And we can keep it contained again in our own environment, as opposed to contributing it upstream to like Galaxy, or putting it on like GitHub repos and things like that, which you could do if you prefer. But this is how you can have your own custom content in-house. So we'll go through the steps of publishing an EE with our content, and also storing that EE in our Private Automation Hub. Because the Private Automation Hub, it serves two purposes. The first being a repo for our collections, and also a graphical user interface to search through and find collections that are either the community ones that we pulled in, or the certified collections that vendors provide and work with Red Hat to vet those out. And then also our own custom collections. It's the same way with the EEs. It's also a repo for them as well. So it would be a container registry that we can use in-house. So those are the two main functions that it provides, and it's just a part of the platform. So this is not like a product or anything extra. When you're a customer and subscribing to the Ansible Automation platform, then you can spin up Private Automation Hub, or hubs for redundancy, and it's just a part of the platform. So once we have all of these constructs, we'll be able to run our playbooks, and we can use that role as long as we have an EE, which we will, and we'll pull that down into my local environment, and I'll use Ansible Navigator to run the playbooks with this new collection that has the role that allows us to do the router compliance. So there's a lot of things going on here. It'll make more sense after we see it in action. But these are basically all the different steps that we're going to go through. So the first part is the collections. And just to drill into this just a little bit before we move forward, and make sure that we have a clear delineation of what collections are and roles and how they work together. We'll just walk through this quickly here. So collections are the current method to package modules and roles. So in the past here, and for those that have been using Ansible for a while, you probably recall back when Ansible Engine used to have the core base, software of Ansible, but it also included all of the modules. So a lot of these modules were either maintained by Red Hat, or maintained by vendors, or both. In some cases, it was kind of co-created. And we would have to wait for a new release of the Ansible engine to have all the updates of the modules. So we moved into the new paradigm where they decoupled the core engine, which is Ansible, from all of the modules that were from vendors or community contributions, and you would have to install them into your virtual environments. So with the advent of the EEs now, with the current versions of the Ansible controller and Ansible Navigator, then we have to address in order to get access to the modules, we have to have the collections. So we need to have them available in our EEs, or we can add them to an EE at runtime, because we can include like a requirements.yaml file and then pull them down as needed. But that option actually it takes a bit longer. So that process would take longer than just creating like an EE that has the collections that include the modules that you need. But the modules are really important because really the modules are the code that we're using when we run a playbook. So the module is typically for networking. For the most part, they're written in Python. And we need to have access to modules or very specific versions of modules, depending on what types of the devices we're using and, the vendor requirements for those devices and those modules and plugins, right? Because we have the connection plugins and all sorts of plugins for like dynamic inventories and, other functionality that would supplement what's in these core modules. So we need to have a way of providing them. So that's where the execution environments come into play. But in the past, like if we looked at roles, you used to contribute roles into Galaxy, and then you could install those roles from Galaxy. And then we moved into like the certified collections. So for the roles, they've moved forward, and we have validated content now, which is really a collection that's focused around roles. And in the validated content, these are like sort of like super roles because they're roles that can call other roles, and they provide some level of curation and a prescriptive way of building your automation around a use case. So we can kind of build our own roles or super roles in house. And the way that we do that is we can create our own custom roles and then package them into a collection. So that's where the private automation hub um, is how we do that. And then that's the repository. So that way we can still continue to pull down from the community. And then we have access to the certified collections, but it's all in our private environment. And then we have, the ability to create these custom roles as collections, or if we want to create our own custom modules, because sometimes there's that situation where maybe the vendor has updated something or they have some solution that you're using that's not covered in a current module in a collection. You can go through the steps. Like if you have like a workaround in Python, you could create a custom module and then provide that as a collection in your private automation hub. Or if you want to, if you have a Python script that's kind of complicated to use in Python, then you can abstract the complexity because you can front end it with a playbook that's written in YAML. So you can kind of dumb it down and simplify it as a YAML front end where you can define your parameters in a playbook. And then behind the scenes, your Python code is running as a custom module. But most of the time we see the majority of the private repository um, being focused more on the roles. So roles are very popular and very much needed again to work as a team and to be able to share those best practices that you're building as these purpose-built playbooks that you're turning into roles. So to create like the collection or the skeleton of the collection, it's similar to the way that you create the skeleton of a role, and you use the Ansible -Galaxy command line to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my screen a little bit so I can keep that over here. And hopefully this has been sharing okay, because I don't know that's it's like that. Um, just real quick. Can anyone give me an emoji, thumbs up that you're seeing my screen? Okay. Okay, cool. Just to make sure. All right. So I'm going to bring this over here, and I guess yeah, where I'm at right now. So I'm going to go into my controller. So this is my Ansible automation controller. I've SSH'd into it, and this is just where I work from because I have already installed like the Ansible builder. Ansible-builder is a command line tool for creating execution environments. And then I have Ansible installed, so I have the command lines for like Ansible-Galaxy available for me so that I can create collections and roles and those types of things. So I kind of work, all from that server with those tools that have been built. And we'll kind of talk about, these tools too. If you don't have them installed, you usually have two ways of installing them. If you're using RHEL, you can yum or DNF install them, or if not, you can use pip install, and then that's how you can bring it install like the Ansible builder, and Ansible Navigator we're going to talk about. So when we go into those sections, I'll just reiterate on like what you need if you don't already have them, or if you have a question on how to make them work in your platform, feel free to ask that when we go into those sections. So the first part of this is creating the collection. So where I'm at right now, I have some some files already on here. So let me go back a directory or a couple directories here. Yeah, so in this directory, I have this router underscore old. This is just for me going through this earlier, and I was creating the collection, and I just wanted to save my files to save time because I didn't want to have to recreate most of these files that we're going to go through. So I'll give you the examples, and I'll be copying some of the files over again just to save time. So in this particular folder, router old, it has a collection that's called compliance. So what we see here in the slide is router dot compliance. So this is a namespace. So normally this would be like a vendor namespace, like Cisco.ios collection, right, or Arista.eos. So for this particular demo, I just created, this compliance collection because it's going to be based off of router compliance use case. And then for the namespace, it's just router. So I could have router dot security or router dot BGP or something like that. So this is just a namespace that I'm using in my local environment. So it doesn't matter if it's overlapping with somebody else or anything like that. It's just a local namespace that I'm using or intend to use in my private automation hub. So when you have that collection put together, then this command creates a skeleton. So basically, you have a couple of required things that we'll have to do. So in the meta, you have to have a runtime that says this is the minimal version of the Ansible core that needs to be running for this particular collection. And then in galaxy.yaml, there's a bunch of different settings around dependencies. And one of the dependencies is like what collections have to be available, um, you know, for this particular collection. So you can have dependencies of other collections being there or it wouldn't work properly. So we'll see some examples of that. And then there's obviously a need for documentation and so on and so forth. So that way your collection has all of the same content that you would typically expect to see in a collection. But these are your collections, so it would be based off of your own standards. Unless you intend on publishing these, into Galaxy, then you would have further requirements. And then obviously, if you're a vendor and you're going through all of the process and rigor of being certified, then you have additional requirements around that of all of the things that should be available in your collection. But for in-house, it's whatever standards you're coming up with internally. So oops, sorry about that. So I'm going to go ahead and I need to run this command anyway, so that way I create like a new folder here. It's Ansible Galaxy, and we're building a collection. And then we're going to initialize, so that'll be the whole deal with building the skeleton folders. So router dot compliance. So now when I list this directory, now it's there, right? So the router old was the one that I did previously, and now we have router. So some of the other things that we need, and why is this not, sorry about that. There we go. Yeah. So I mentioned we had a couple of requirements that we'll have to deal with. So this is where I was talking about in the meta runtime.yaml, we have to set the minimal Ansible, right? So for a couple of these things, I'm just going to copy this so that way it takes a little bit less time. So I'm going to remove the one that we just built. And I'll just, before I do that, let me just show you. So tree router. right? So we have all these files, but they don't have anything populated in them yet. So if I remove that, right, and I'm just going to copy the router old to router. Oops. All right, so now it's in there. Then I've already done some of these things, so it'll save time. So the other thing was some dependencies. So in galaxy.yaml, um, one of the things that I included in here, because we're going to use this role that we're packaging into a collection, but it does need to have the Cisco IOS collection. And it will have that because I'm going to use one of the out of the box execution environments that already has this collection available. So I'm just saying that it has to be greater than version 4.0.0, which it will. So I think it's on like a 4.6 or something like that. So we'll be newer than this minimal requirement as a dependency. But this is just an example to show a dependency. And then you can populate like your name as an author, and there's a bunch of other settings in that file. So if I bring that up real quick, actually I need to be in router, galaxy.yaml. Wait a minute, where am I at? This does not have that. Oh, I know why. I'm not far enough over. It's collection. I mean, it's the compliance. There it is. And then it's going to be the galaxy. Yeah, it's kind of hard to look at, but the part that I changed were the dependencies. You can see that it automatically grabs the name. So the name of this collection is compliance. It's the first version, so 1.0.0. So we want to, version control these as we're updating these collections. It does come with a out of the box README, and then I populated my email for the name or the author rather. And here's a dependency down here. So I went ahead and added this dependency. So that's in there. So other than that, those two things have to be in there. The other stuff you really should add, like documentation and so on and so forth. But for just like the minimal standard, that's what we needed. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to take these folders that we've created and populated, and we want to have them converted into a tar.gz file. So that way we can have it either uploaded into like a repository, like a Git repository type of thing, or in our case, it's going to go into the private automation hub. So with this one, let me change directories. Router components, right? And then we've got this already in here. So what I could do is remove that. And now it's gone. And then what I'll do is I'll go ahead and run the Ansible Galaxy build. Someone wants to join. Hold on a second. Let me pop back over here. Where did it go? Okay. And pop that back there. So Ansible Galaxy collection build. All right. So you see it created another tar file there. Okay. So locally we have this file, and now it's at a point where we need to, either push it to some other repository, but in our case, it's going to be the private automation hub. So hence the private automation hub. So we need to do a couple of things to make this work. So the first part of it is we need to create our namespace. And again, this is like a private namespace, so it doesn't matter what we use. And for me to have access to it, I need to go into a virtual machine that I'm running for that, or that has access to it. So not that one. Yeah, this controller. So let me move this out of the way. Okay. There we go. Be a horrible time not to remember my password. All right, so this is the automation hub, and I'm on the controller, but it gives me access through the web browser since they're on the same private network, so I can access this automation hub. So the first part of it is the namespace. So if I click in here in namespaces and do that, so you can kind of see the rest of the screen, I can create one. Right, so we called it router. So we go ahead and create that. And it says no collections yet. So what we're uploading is that tar.gz file. So I have to find that. Um, Let me make sure I'm in the home directory and find the correct one. So we were in here and we were in router. Use this mouse. Compliance. And then here it is. So we select that and then we'll upload it. And it takes it a minute to kind of pull it all in and extract it. So it's kind of doing its thing. Okay, so it finished. Right, so it says it's done. But what we need to do is we need to approve it to be used for anyone who has access to the private automation hub. So if I go back into collections, I can find approval. And then here's what we just did. So it shows it in staging. So it needs a review, and then we approve it. Oh, changes to certification settings. Saved. Okay, so I have self-sign certificates in this. So what I needed to do is when I go back to here, history, and then Ansible navigate, or actually history grep it, or actually Ansible Galaxy is what I want. I know I need it to add. Hold on a second. I have to ignore certs in some of these things. So I should have that still. Let me just see what I've got in that file. Make this router old. Move me. I'm just seeing if I still have that Ansible config file real quick too. I'll have to make it if I didn't. Yeah, so that's just the role stuff. All right, so for the Ansible config, I need to be back here. And I'll have to get my token. So let me start this part over. Copy -rf router. All right, so that's in there, and then all right, so then all right, so in this Ansible config, I need to get my token. So the token is actually from that's back from the private automation hub. So we're going to need this in a bit anyway. So let me go back into that from here, and I gotta get a token. And let me see if I had already had it down here, which I do. No, that's not the right one. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna have to make it. No, this is just my local lab stuff, so no one can access it. So get out of here. Hopefully I can paste that. No, it doesn't paste from there. Huh? All right, so what I do is, since I can't paste from there, is I need to go into the VM and bring up this. So we got, or actually I do already have that over here. Okay, I do. Yeah, that's where it is. Okay, so we'll hold off on that. So let me try to bring up from that tar file the one that I did earlier with ignoring the cert or the TLS cert check. So if I go back, and sorry, I'm like kind of jumping all over the place. So I need to go back into this VM. That is the VM. All right. So in the VM, back into the hub. Oh, the wrong browser. I need to be in this one. Okay. All right. So when this one ended, it didn't. No, it actually did finish. So let me try to do it again. So if I go back into here, collections, we have the namespace, but it's going to be. I'll have to probably I'll just start that all over again. So I need to find. Actually, I can search for it. Let me make. Can I make this bigger here? Make it a little bit easier to see. All right. So we want the router one. All right. It's weird how it says that it published it though. Maybe that wasn't as big of a issue as I thought it was. Go back to here to the approval thing. Maybe I misread that. Oh, needs review. It doesn't say that it needs. I don't know. Maybe that was kind of a glitchy thing that I saw there. I was thinking at first it was because I didn't do the ignore TLS, but I think that's later, and the EE is the one that had problems with that. So we'll see what happens. It seems like it's actually in there. So go back to compliance. Yeah. Yeah. So I'll leave that one alone for now in case it doesn't work later. But that's us, the 1.0 version of it. So okay. All right. So back to the next part of it. So if we have our collection and all the files that we think we need to kind of stage this thing, then we can move into the EE. So from the EE perspective, I don't really need this one. Uh, get rid of you. I think I just really let me get out of this. I think I just need this part of it here. So all right. So that was the collection. We uploaded it into the private automation hub and then approved it. I saw that message, but then it still went through. So not sure what happened with that one. It might have been because I had done this yesterday and I didn't completely clean it out and then tried to update it and it was the same version, which now I'm thinking that might have been something that we saw and I should have kept that screen up a little bit longer. But it's in there, right? So we have that collection. So now what we want to do is get to the execution environment part of this. So in order to do that, there's some files that we have to deal with. And the first thing is you would create a folder called EE-build, which I already have. So let me change directories into that. And this will be a very simple configuration. So I have the Ansible config file that I was wondering about earlier. I couldn't remember exactly where that was, but this is where it is. And then this is the one that has tokens. So if these tokens, I might have screwed these up because I created new ones, but I think these should still be okay. If not, I'll have to paste them into here, the updated ones. But the reason why we need these tokens is when you want to connect to the private automation hub, you can use it with a token, and it can provide you with what we call the published repo. And that's what we're going to use because this is the content that we're publishing, like our own custom content. But then we also have access to the certified content and to the community content. So we can pull them through our automation hub as well. And each one of them has like, here's just like a local, IP in my lab. So it's to the same API, but it's just accessing, different components of the collections depending on which Galaxy server we need to connect to, either published, certified, or community. So without having them, when we try to build the EE, we can't get access to that content. So that's why that's there. The other important piece is the configuration for the EE, and that's a part of the execution environment.yaml file, this right here. So for that one, and I'll just bring up this Vim editor for that. There's a couple of things that we have to look at. So what I did is I created tried to simplify this as much as possible. So this particular one here, I do have some requirements. So the build argument defaults, I have to explicitly define what I want the base image to be, and also the builder image, because we also include additional layers for like the Ansible runner and stuff like that. So there may be like a very specific Ansible builder and also a specific base image that already has certain collections provided for us. So obviously all of the Ansible built-in stuff is there for us with the Ansible core, but everything else, it just depends on your base image that you're starting with. So in using this one here, this is the one of the ones that's out of the box in your controller. So you'll notice that when you deploy a controller, you have some built-in execution environments. So this is my controller over here. And if you go down to execution environments, you can see that there's a lot of stuff in here. Some of these I've added, but things like this minimal execution environment. Let me make this larger so it's easier to see. Right, we've got some of these that are like out of the box, like the default execution environment. This one has from the automation hub, it pulled down the one that we're talking about here, which is the EE supported Rail latest. And then you have a minimal. So you get, the default ones from your private automation hub, and then you also have the ones that were already pre-installed in your controller. And then most of these other ones that you see here are execution environments that I added later. So, additional capabilities that I needed for particular use case, like Cisco ICE as an example. And I built those later and then made those available for my controller. So the good news is when we use um, the one that we're using here, this supported Rail latest, it already has Cisco iOS collection included. So we don't have to worry about adding that one explicitly. But we do need to add the ones that are not available in that EE. So if we look at the requirements.yaml here, I really just needed to add what we're adding. So the addition is going to be the router.compliance. So if I get out of this file here, click on this so it'll let me out. All right, so you can see that I have a requirements.yaml. So if I open that up, the only thing that I'm calling is what we're building. All right, so that's the new thing, the new addition that we need for our playbooks to work. And then like requirements.text, we really don't need that for this one. Let me see if there's anything even in that. But this is where you would, yeah, so I don't need that because I don't have to call that in particular. But if you do need like a very specific version of Ansible Core, really anything else like Python related, you can add that into the requirements .text. But I'm just going to take that out. All right, so the three things that we have in here is the Ansible config that we looked at earlier that had my tokens. The configuration for the EE is execution environment.yaml, and the requirements.yaml would be any of the collections that we want to add on top of what's already in the base that we defined in the execution environment.yaml file. So we have those things. So there's a couple other steps that we need. So this is the same file that we looked at. Right. So, so the next part I'm talking about the tokens themselves. So I'm just to be careful because I don't want to waste time. I'm going to go back into the hub and I'm going to grab those tokens and update them just in case. I have a feeling that's going to cause me a problem. So to do that, sorry, I have to find it again in here. Okay. So go back into the hub, into collections, into API token, load a token, copy a token. And because of the clipboard, I need to do it inside of here. So vim ansible.config. Get rid of this. Save it up. And then I can get rid of you for a second. All right, so we have our token updated. We know our requirements.yaml was in there. We looked at that. So where do other collections come from? Then I mentioned, that was because we already have this base image here. And when I bring up the navigator, we can actually look inside of that, and I can show you what the collections that are already pre-installed there. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to create a context. So this will create like the container file and some other things that we need to package this EE together. So we just run this command. And if you don't have Ansible Builder, then you would need to install that, like pip install it, like pip install Ansible-builder from where you want to run it from. So do that. So we built the new context, which includes this folder here, context. And you see it creates this container file. And we'll see like that container file when we build the EE container, it'll go through all the steps. And it'll build like the base image and all those things that we defined. We'll see that on the screen. So that's basically what we're talking about here. But before we get to that point, we do need to log in. Right, so I'm going to log in. Podman is kind of like Docker, if I could spell it correctly, or it's kind of the, what we use as Docker. We use Podman in RHEL. Here's that ignore the certificate thing that I was talking about earlier, but it was just a little bit too soon to worry about it. I equals false. So it ignores the certificate checking. And then this is the hub. All right, so it's going to log into the private automation hub. And it says that, oh, I'm already logged in. So this is still logged in from like the last time that I logged in. So we don't have to worry about that part of it. So now I want to run this command here. And there's a lot going on. So what this is going to do is we've already added, those, like kind of the skeleton of the EE. So it has all of those folders, those required folders. So we want to use the contents of them when we build the EE. So that's why we're pointing to the context folder with the container file. And then we also wanted to add like a version to this particular EE that we're building. So this colon is like a tag or a label. And then this will be like the first version 1.0. So if we update this collection, then we would start to version control that. And then we would have 1.1, and so on. So we're going to run that. And at the conclusion of this is I do not have like a certificate, like so I have the self-signed certificate running in my lab. And I'm just using like IP addresses instead of fully qualified domain names and actual certificates. So I have to use this TLS verify false for a lot of these things. Otherwise, we'll get a certificate error when we run these commands. So let me I just want to copy this out so I don't have to type all that stuff. Oh, I know why it's doing that. It's because I'm in the presenter mode. I can grab it like this. Yeah. Okay. All right. So you see it starts to build all these steps that are based off of that container file. And then let me bring this back to where it was. Oops. So exit full screen. And this usually just takes a couple minutes to build everything out. The collections have like their dependencies, so you'll see like a lot of Python stuff that it's bringing into the build of the container. So so the next thing is once we have that, we can just verify that there's an image that's running locally. And then once we see that it's there, then we can push it to our private automation hub. So before we were uploading a collection, because that's just one thing that we can do with the repo part of it. The other thing is we can use that as a container registry for our EEs. So collections are one thing, EEs are, include collections, but it's a separate repository function. For that function, we push these images into it as a container registry. So hopefully this hurries up and finishes. It's usually a good sign that it takes a few minutes anyway. Otherwise, it usually fails like towards the beginning if it's not going to work. And just to kind of show you what we're going to do while we're waiting on that. So I'll have to push it, into the private automation hub. Again, I have to ignore the certificates. And then once it's there, we can use it with our Ansible Navigator. Then I can run a playbook against it. So we're probably going to go a couple minutes over because we have this taking a few minutes, but this shouldn't take too much longer to get the Navigator running once we have the EE. All right, so see how it says successfully tagged it, and it has that version 1.0. Um, the verification is Podman images, and then this is our image right here. But this only is a local image, right? So we need to get it over to the private automation hub. So that's what we were talking about up here, right? So we need to push it over there. Oh, let me pop out of there real quick too, so I can grab this. All right, so this will push it for us, and it's got to build out like all the layers. The ones that already exist were because of that image that we started with, that base image. It's really the new things that you see as it was updating. All right, so that pushes it over to the private automation hub. And then we have our Ansible Navigator. So the Ansible Navigator is running down here. I was looking at this earlier. All right, so in the Ansible Navigator, I have a project, I have a playbook that I want to run against that collection. So before I can do that, I need to pull down those files. So one of the things that we're talking about here is this pull command. So basically, we just named, that particular EE, right? That's version.1. We're going to pull it down from the private automation hub. And it does say that I need to log into this, but I'm assuming since I was still logged in from the last time from the other VM that I'm logged in still here. But if not, I'll have to log in for that part. So let me go ahead and make this a little bit larger so it's easier to see. Clear it. All right, so let's pull it down. Control A. All right. So we're going to pull that down. So let's see how it's pulling down the container. All right. So now we have it local so that we can use it in our Ansible Navigator. So the configuration for the Ansible Navigator is this. And you can see that I'm pointing to this image. So this is the image that we created as an EE. And inside that image of the EE container has our collection that we need to use. So one of the things we can do is verify that. Ansible Navigator. Oop, if I spelled it correctly. collections. See how like these are all the ones that were in that real EE that we used as the base image, and here's Cisco iOS. What we care about is router compliance is what we created. So this is a this is the collection of a role that we created. And then the actual role itself, I probably should have showed you that real quick before we use it. So if we go back into here and I go back into router, and into compliance. And then if we look at the roles, right? I think I did kind of show you these folders earlier, but I didn't go into them in specifics. So these are different roles that I've created. So just to look at NTP, right? This is a role and it has all the various folders that you would expect to see for a role. The task is where we kind of like where the playbook part of this is, where the tasks are defined. So if I go into task, or actually, let me do a cat NTP task main, or actually not main, it's going to be iOS, right? Or maybe it is main. Let's see what we got. No, it's not main. If I tab, it'll show me what my options are. Yeah, oh, it's Cisco IO. Okay, Cisco. All right, so here's the task. All right, so here's like what you expect to see in like either a task that's in a playbook, or in this case, the task is in a role. We're going to configure NTP. And the state of replace is because it's compliant. So it's going to look at your config to see if it's in compliance or not, or whether or not the config should be replaced, either added or configs removed. And how it does that in the role is it has variables defined to be like the single source of truth. So those are in here as well. All right, so here's NTP for iOS, iOS XE routers. So it's going to look for these NTP servers. If they're not in there, it's going to want to add them. If there's other additional NTP servers, it's going to want to remove them because the state is replaced. We're going to run it in check mode, so it doesn't actually make the change on the router. It just tells us if it would need to change it, so we get a list of what's out of compliance without actually changing it right then. So that's kind of the mechanics of what's going on with the compliance check. So to access that at this point, I have a playbook up here, compliance.yaml. And what you can see in the playbook is under task, I have this Ansible.builtin include role. So this module can include roles, right? So the role that we're going to include has been defined here as SNMP. But since we were just talking about NTP, I can change it to that, right? And I just need to save it. Or I could list out NTP, SNMP, ACL, or, there was a bunch of other roles in there. So we'll look at the NTP since we are more familiar with that one. And I'm going to run it against 4 Cisco routers that are in a group called Cisco only. So in order for me to run this and for it to work, again, we're going to use the navigator to run the playbook, and then it'll run it against those routers, and we can validate whether or not it worked for those routers. So yeah, so let's go ahead and do that. The other part of this is the namespace. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this. So this is the namespace that we created, router.compliance. So the way that it finds this is because this is a collection that's available in the EE that we're using that we defined in ansible-navigator.yaml. Right, so we'll be able to look for this namespace, and this collection happens to include a role. So when we go into router.compliance, it'll be the name of the role. So it's going to look in the roles folder by default, and then it's going to select whatever we selected here. So in this tag, we set NTP, so it's going to run the NTP role, and it's going to run it against Cisco IOS because these routers in this inventory, which is defined here, these are iOS based or iOS XE based routers. They're CSR 1000Bs. So that those are kind of the the connections between this, and here's how we define that it's iOS for them as a variable. So it's the Ansible underscore network OS, and I also have I'm using a key to access them instead of a password because these routers are running in AWS. So having said all that, that was just the background, the backstory. So Ansible, Navigator, run, clients, and then we want standard output. So -m std output. So it looks like the old school Ansible -playbook type of output, standard output. And then I want to run it in check mode. So it shouldn't apply. It won't apply the change. It'll look like it's changing them, but it's not actually applying the change. And fingers crossed that we actually connect to the routers. All right, so we did. And this is some output. So this is they show change, but they weren't actually changed. I'm not collecting the artifacts. I turned that off, but if I had left that on, we could go into the change part of it and see what changed, but I have that disabled. So as an alternative, I'm just using debug commands to show us on the screen so we can see what actually happened behind the scenes. So for this, it went to router 1, and it's saying the current NTP configuration is empty. And then as part of a resource module, because I'm using resource modules for this compliance check, it's showing me the built-in. I can print out everything. I just print out the afters. So I want to see, I'm sorry, the before, and I want to see what commands would be sent. So I'm not printing out the afters, which doesn't really show much here anyway because we're running it in check mode. So what it's showing is that we started with an empty NTP config, and then this is what we need to replace in order for it to be compliant with that variable file that was a part of the role. So I'm using that as like a single source of truth, or like my configuration baseline to use to check against. So it's saying, we didn't have these NTP servers, so we need to add them. So then we move down to the other routers, and they're all kind of in the same boat. None of them are running NTP. So just real quick, and I also want to show you the router real fast so you can see that it didn't actually make a change, is let's go back in here. And this one does have a couple mistakes in it, SNMP. So I just changed that variable. And then we'll run it against SNMP in check mode. All right, so it's changed again. So this time for the SNMP, all right, so router 4, this one's saying in the before, we do have a user, but it's misspelled. All right, it's this user is not the user that's in our configuration. So for that, just to show you real quick, if I go back to here, right, and I've got SNMP, and it's going to be Cisco, right? I'm in roles, so SNMP, right? What's next? Bars. Yeah. So here's what it should be, or actually, let me scroll up for the iOS one. The group is v3 group, and the user, you can see we have v3 user. So this is what it would check against. These are the correct parameters, and the variables that define them for SNMP config. So that's what it's checking against. So it goes through and it shows me the before, and I can see some of these things are wrong. So for it to remediate that, if we were to run it in like the regular mode, then or run mode instead of check mode, then it would remove this user because that's wrong, and then it would add all of the other configurations that are needed. for a SNMP version 3 config. And it's kind of the same thing for these other ones. Pretty much all of them have that bogus user, so it has to remove that in the group and then add it back in. So that's kind of across the board. And if you go into like router 1 as an example, or was I already in that? One of these terminals already had the, there it is. Let me just log into router 1. Right. Show run. So we ran NTP, SNTP, but it didn't apply the configuration because it was check mode. And an SNMP will still have the wrong information, right? So this V3 user wrong. Okay, so if I go back, open up this terminal, right, and this is not running in check mode. So we're on the SNMP side of things, so I'll run it this time. It should change the SNMP. And remember, all these roles that we're accessing are running in that EE from the collection that we created for roles. All right, so this time it looks kind of the same, right? Or actually it does look the exact same. But when I go back into the router, now we have the actual configs that were needed, right? So this is the correct configuration for SNMP. So pretty easy using resource modules and the like for these compliance checks. But like I created this and I created it based off of roles, but now I can share my roles with anybody that has this execution environment that includes my router.compliance collection with that role or roles in it for NTP and SNMP and STIG and ACLs. I think that's, and logging. It had logging as well. Actually, I can just look at it again real quick, show you. Yeah, it has ACLs, logging, NTP, SNMP, and then STIG for like a DISA check against your routers for their requirements for STIG checking. So let me go back here. And thanks for everyone that stayed on. I kind of needed a little bit extra time because I kind of stumbled there in the beginning, remembering where everything was. But I hope that that gave you a pretty good idea of how to build a collection. So if you create some roles, you'll just copy them into your collection after you do the collection, do Ansible-Galaxy collection init, then copy your roles into it, and then build your collection. And then that creates a tar file that you can upload into your private automation hub. You'll create that namespace first. You'll upload it into your namespace, and then you'll approve it. And then it's available for you to go to the next step and build your EE. And then you can push that image into your private automation hub. And then you would have that available to pull it into your Ansible Navigator. Or you could also run that using the Ansible Automation Controller, right? Because you create a project and then point to a Git repository for like your playbooks and the such. But you would also create an EE that would have that available role in the collection that the controller is using. So pretty much it's the same. The navigator and the controller is the same. It's just command line versus using the GUI. But effectively, this process would be similar across the board. So I wanted to pause and make sure that there's no questions or anything before we shut this down. And if you're asleep, you can wake up now. We're done. All right. Well, take that as no questions, and I'll get another topic out there that we'll go through here in a couple weeks or so. And I'm glad to have you back. Take care, everybody. Have a great day.
Sure, thanks.
Yeah. Take care.